think where democracy comes out of. It's fundamentally based on humanism. So let me quiz you. I may have shared this with you in one of our late night discussions. But this is something I think everyone who's listening could do. Quiz themselves, but also for people around them. You're standing on the side of the river and you see a stranger floating by and they're heading towards a waterfall. And they're obviously having trouble. And let's assume they perish if they hit the waterfall. And you've got a ring you can throw out there, a rope, and save them, right? And then out of the corner of your eye, you see your pet, your favorite dog, cute thing as it is, woof, 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 coasting by this stranger. Who do you save? You only get to save one.
Oh, I'd take the person without a second thought.
Most people in the Western world who are older pick the person. Most younger people pick the pet. This is about humanism. You saved the stranger. Why? You don't even know the person. Young people say we have too many people. There are billions and billions of people. That dog is my dog. I love that dog. We don't need more people. That dog, if he dies, will hurt me personally. So they saved the dog. I'm not even trying to make a value judgment here. I'm just describing the numbers that seem to come back when this question is asked. Please, everyone, do it yourself. Ask that question of young people, old people. Let them struggle with the answer. But if we don't think that stranger is more important, then it's hard to have a democracy. Because without believing in humanism, the sacredness of that individual, that there is something bigger that unites us all, a non-local consciousness, a God, you can call it whatever you want, that sees us all of having value and therefore worth listening to, then what's the point of having democracy? And that begins to challenge some of the assumptions we've taken for granted.
Once you know that, you think, okay, what's the sacrifice? Well, that's the question. That's the same question as what's the nature of life? What's the nature of work? What's the principle of community? Like the example you gave with the stranger in the stream and the dog. What do you sacrifice? The dog, right? Your attachment to the dog, your juvenile sentimentality, right? Maybe even your hatred. What if it's an enemy in the stream? What if it's the bully who made your life miserable or your dog? It's like, what do? You rescue the bully. Why? That's a hard question. The answer to that is something like, if you don't rescue the bully, the world turns into hell. It's something like that. And you think, well, that's not obvious. It's like, well, yeah, that's for sure. It's not obvious, but your conscience will tell you that. And so, yeah. So how did we get into this? Well, we were trying to figure out what had gone wrong, you know, at a fundamental level. And then we switched into this discussion of deeper, that whatever the highest divine principle might be, it transcends the categories of time and space, and it's not bound by what's materially real. And so if your initial starting point is there's nothing but what's material, then there's no sense having a discussion about value at all. But if you understand that you have to have a discussion of value because you have to value things to act, then you do. This is one of the points I tried to make in the book. The idea that we see the world through a story is an incontrovertible fact. It is being demonstrated in at least 6 different independent disciplines. And it's not only true for our beliefs, let's say, that we live in a story, but it actually structures the very perceptions that hypothetically inform us about the facts. And I think this is a revolutionary realization that a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. We live in a story. The postmodernists were right about that. And that's partly why we have this culture war. It's because the postmodernists were right about that. Now, their solution to that, their analysis of that problem was lacking, sorely lacking, to say the least, and unbelievably self-serving and worshiping at the feet of power and hedonism as well, which is a very bad idea. You might say, why? It's like, worship of power is self-defeating. You know, I outlined the data from the chimp studies. Chimp tyrants, like human tyrants, tend to meet a very unpleasant end and early in life. It's like, well, what happens if you play a power game? Well, then you're in the power game. And the problem with being in the power game is as soon as you're not the biggest kid on the block, you're not just dead, you're ripped apart and dead. And so there are things that you can raise to the highest place, power, and sex for that matter, hedonism in general. The problem with doing that is that it doesn't iterate. It doesn't work. You can't do that with other people because they object. And not only that, even if you do that with yourself, you'll defeat yourself in the future. So what I've tried to outline in this book is the idea that there are a radically limited number of self-sustaining and improving principles. And that's something like a natural law. It's something like there's a universe of games. Some of them are playable and some of them aren't. Non-playable games are much more common. Games that will defeat themselves that no one wants to play. Then there's a fraction of games that are playable. So people will do them voluntarily and they'll iterate. Then there's a smaller fraction that iterate and improve. There's even a smaller fraction that iterate and improve multi-generationally. Well, the biblical stories capture the spirit of the iterated game that improves over centuries. And I think accurately. I think one of the cases I try to make in this book, you might say, well, what's the alternative to power? And that's fairly clear. Voluntary sacrifice is the alternative to power. And that's why the biblical texts concentrate on sacrifice. So what do you mean? What does sacrifice mean? What do you give up to be married?
Yeah.
What do you give up to have a friend? What do you give up to have a community? If it's all about you, you give up nothing. But if it's all about you, you don't have a community. So obviously the community is predicated on sacrifice. Once you know that, you think, okay, what's the sacrifice? Well, that's the question. That's the same question as what's the nature of life? What's the nature of work? What's the principle of community? Like the example you gave with the stranger in the stream and the dog. What do you sacrifice? The dog. Right.